The eagerly awaited tennis documentary is finally here and available to stream on Netflix. Since its announcement in January 2022, tennis fans were waiting to see if the producers of the F1 Drive to Survive will be able to make it a phenomenon. So I binge-watched the first part of the series, which got released yesterday, just 3 days before the Australian Open.
Classic Netflix strategic move.
First part consists of 5 episodes and feature players like Nick Kyrgios, Ajla Tomljanovic, Casper Ruud, Felix Auger-Aliassime, Matteo Berrettini, Maria Sakkari and Taylor Fritz. I will try to keep the review spoiler-free, but you can expect little to none. The first episode, called The Maverick, starts with the young generation of tennis wanting to find a way to beat the greats of tennis and their main goal, which is to win the Grand Slam. Basically, this series targets audience who don't follow tennis, so it explains the hierarchy of tennis tournaments, how scoring system works for women and men. The featured player in the episode is Australian Nick Kyrgios. This episode covers his performance at the 2022 Australian Open in singles and doubles and how he dealt with his mental struggles. You can also expect cuss words being used while watching this episode. Well, if you have watched last year's Australian Open, you know what happened in his singles draw. And in the doubles, he won the title with his good mate, Thanasi Kokkinakis. The second episode, which is called Take the Crown, starts with Djokovic incident, which briefly shows how and why Novak Djokovic was not allowed to participate in the tournament. The featured player in this episode is Matteo Berrettini of Italy. Many people were rooting him to win the title after the exit of Novak. When the Netflix was filming the series, him and Ajla Tomljanovic were still a couple, so it shows their relationship. But we all know they would split for good in February, after almost 3 years together. The episode covers behind the scenes of how he prepares a match and his love for the game of tennis and how he was destined to be a tennis player after almost every member of his family played tennis. This is the first time we see Rafa in the series. Again, if you watched last year's Australian Open, you know what happened in the match. The episode ends up with Rafa lifting the title in Melbourne after defeating Russian Daniil Medvedev in a miraculous final. Also, Paul Anacone's bit is fantastic and his commentary is so beautiful, it adds a lot to the scene. One thing I noticed is that they didn't show any stuff from the women's side about the winner, Ash Barty, and her retirement from the game after her title win. The third episode is called California Dreaming and it features players like Maria Sakkari and Taylor Fritz. This episode focuses on the Indian Wells tournament and how it hasn't had an American winner in the last 21 years, and now Taylor Fritz has a chance to win his biggest title till date. Lots of behind the scene from both men's and women's side in this episode, and how Taylor almost decided to pull off before the final after hurting himself during the practice session on a day before the final. This is one of those episodes where the story of one of the featured player ends on a good note. The fourth episode is called Great Expectations. I also had great expectations from this one because of it being filmed around the clay season. Frankly speaking, the episode didn't do justice to the title. Yes, in some ways it's great as it shows how a woman from a small country, Tunisia, became one of the best tennis player in the world and finally winning the biggest title in her career. But it also missed one of the most exciting chapter of the clay swing. No talk of Carlos Alcaraz winning Madrid Open after defeating 2 of the biggest names in tennis, Rafa and Novak, in back-to-back matches, which has never happened before. The episode also features Spanish player Paula Badosa, who became world number 2 and shows her struggles, how it's affecting her, and why isn't she as successful as she was in juniors tennis. The fifth episode and the final episode, and frankly my favorite of the part 1, is titled King of Clay. Now you must be thinking that this episode features Rafa, but you're wrong. The featured player of this episodes are Casper Ruud and Felix Auger-Aliassime, who are both related to Rafa in some ways. Rafa's uncle now coaches Felix, meanwhile Casper Ruud, who has trained at the Rafa's academy, both looking to dethrone Rafa as the King of Clay. Like I said, Rafa is not the protagonist here, rather he is sort of an antagonist who defeats our protagonists in this episode. The episode has some very dramatic behind the scenes, a tough situation for Uncle Tony, powerful music at the right moment, and 2 great matches. The second part of the series will be released in June, somewhere between the French Open and the Wimbledon. If you ask me, I think the series is good, but it could be better. They had lot of content they decided to ignore. I hope the next part will be better. Well, that's the end of the video. Do tell us what do you think of the documentary in the comments section. Until the next video, cheers.